Hey everyone, I wanted to talk about Cyberpunk, the new show that's just come out on Netflix. 10 episodes long, 20 minutes each. It's an anime by Studio Trigger. It's basically a story set in the world of Cyberpunk, and it's really good. So I've just finished watching it. These are going to be kind of like my initial thoughts on it. I'm going to do a little bit of analysis of the story, the characters, just to really get like a kind of feel for it. So full disclosure as well, I have only played about half of the Cyberpunk video game that CDProject Red brought out. So I don't know how that game ends. I don't know what the story is like past like the halfway point of that game. But I can already say that the story in this anime, for me at least, is better than the story of the game. Now the story of the game, I'm not going to go into too much detail of this, I thought was really, really good at the beginning. Started off really intriguing, where you get to go into Arasaka Towers and steal the, the Johnny Silverhand chip thing. It's been a while, so I can't remember it. And that was all. I think the game started off initially very cool. And then after that, it just kind of lost me a bit in terms of what was going on, what was happening. Just, it wasn't as interesting. And I think one of the biggest things, I guess, like almost criticisms or anything that I can kind of give about that game is I wasn't grounded in it. I didn't have a character, or rather the only character that I did like got killed off in, the first chapter. I didn't really have a character that I cared for, right? There's obviously you, but you're you. Right? V in the game is not really a character per se. It's just a way you can interact with everyone. She has a background. There's a couple different to choose from, but she doesn't feel like she has any other relations in this world apart from herself, right? And that's because it's you meant to play out this RPG where you can pretend like, you were a corporate or this or that. Funnily enough, I chose the corporate route, and apparently they didn't even have a mission made for that. But anyway, I digress. One thing that I think the anime does very, very well is it grounds you in this world. It gives you this character. It gives you David, who is the main character of the anime. The first episode basically introduces David. It shows us his situation, his character, and also sets up the inciting incident for everything that happens going in the later episodes. David, he is a boy, his mother is basically working really, really hard to get him to go to Arasaka Academy, which is most likely the best school there is. Basically guarantees a job at Arasaka Tower, which seems to be like kind of like Shinra in Final Fantasy VII. It seems to be basically one of the top corporations that rules over everything, because as we see in this world, in the cyberpunk world, it's basically corporations rule the world. You have money, that gets you places. If you don't have money, then you're basically screwed. David is having trouble fitting in. He's basically a street rat or a street punk. And everyone else at the academy is like super rich. Even if he's a better fighter at the academy, if you're rich, you can just get plugins to yourself to make you a better fighter. Literally money can get you anywhere, and I think the first episode shows that really well. It shows the differences between where he's living. We get to see him walk to school, what he has to walk through, compared to the other kids in the school who are super rich and have everything. We get to see David's life. We get to see what normality is. It's one of my rules I kind of put on myself when I'm writing, is always establish normality before you mess it up. And we get to see this. We get to see what normality is like for David before it gets messed up. We get to basically care for David, kind of like what they do in Arcane. They get us to care for David first. They show us kind of not necessarily what his life is like at its lowest point, but basically almost there, right? We get to the first episode is basically meant to make us care for David, ground us in this world, and show us what normality is like. And I think it does that very, very, very well. And so from this point, there will be spoilers for the show. If you haven't watched it, I very, very much recommend go watching it on Netflix and then coming back here. So then we get to see David's mum being called into the classroom because David's gotten in trouble with a sort of, he had to basically pay for an update for his software, and he basically got it in like a back-end LED dealer, and it made stuff go wrong at the school, and so his mum had to come and apologise, and they're driving home, and an accident happens, and his mum dies. It's not like... I think the cherry on top is that really shows this world is his mum could have been saved, right? But she didn't have the money. Right? She didn't have the insurance. She didn't pay for, the plans that were needed for surgeries and stuff to be done. She could have been saved, but because she didn't have the money, she passed away. David survived, but you can imagine the guilt he must be feeling, right? Him and his mum were only driving back home because, he got in trouble, because he didn't do what his mum said. He didn't buy that program, so he got it through like a back-end alley doctor. As a result, he's got to be feeling the guilt of it, the fact that he killed his mum, and then it's like, well, what is he going to do from this point? He doesn't have anything. He's got no more family. The rent for the place they live in is overdue. What is he going to do? And I think that's a pretty exciting, setup, a thing that you actually want to see. You want to see what's happening. The world as well is interesting enough that you're like, oh yeah, I want to see more of this world. And I talked in Arcane about how the inciting incident kind of tells you what the story is going to be like, the genre of the book, and it is no different here, right? The inciting incident is, sadness, the fact that this is the guilt from essentially killing his mum and the world that we're in and everything. There's almost like an inevitability around it. It basically looks bleak for David, and we're basically going to see what he does next. It's probably not going to be good. And so in the next episode, we are introduced to Lucy, who is the sort of main heroine, the love interest of David, and we get to see things start to turn around for him. Things are starting to look up. He's having a good time with Lucy. He thinks, oh, maybe he can work with her because she gives him like a job to do. I should probably mention the Sandevistan, I think it was called, this kind of like military grade enhancement that he puts on himself, which he only does because he is left with no other choice. He has nothing. He has to, I think at this point he basically just doesn't care whether he lives or dies. It's like, yeah, sure, let's just put it on. Let's do whatever, right? The world has screwed him enough. Let's start screwing the world back. And yeah, the first thing he does is get revenge on one of the students in the school. With the sort of this military grade power, he can essentially move really, really fast for a very short period of time. Though they tell him you should only do this a few times, like 2 or 3 times a day. If you do any more, then you're going to risk basically going crazy, which seems to be what happens when people get too many robotic parts as part of them. I should also point, this is actually a big theme in this, right? I should also point out the very, very first thing we see in the first episode is this guy who has gone crazy, and he is killing, a bunch of police officers, whatever, because he's gone crazy from too many, psychopaths. And we see this as well multiple times throughout the series, which I will get back to later on. And I'm gonna be a bit more sparse in this because I don't want this to be like a really long talk. But we get introduced to Lucy. She's the love interest. We start to see things going up for him. We start to see him go, oh, maybe this is not going to be so bad. And then Lucy betrays him. Because the person who his mum was going to sell the Sandevistan to was essentially Lucy and her gang. And we're kind of left at the end of the second episode with, he was on this high, and then he goes right back down. He's like, this person betrayed him. He is still as low as he possibly can go, but he manages to convince Maine, who is like the leader of this group, to join his group. And I like it. We're introduced to this group at the harsh realities of this world. And I think one of the things I really like about Cyberpunk, what it does quite well, is it keeps the cast of characters quite small. Right? We're not introduced to tons and tons of different characters. We basically, have David, Lucy, Maine, Rebecca, who's like the little gremlin girl, her brother, Kiwi, the driver, I forget his name. But yeah, basically them, right? So, like, 7 main characters, including David, as, like, part of this group. There are obviously more characters, like, in Main's team, but we're basically introduced to 6 of them, not including David, who are going to be kind of our main cast throughout the show. There's obviously, you know, some of the villains and everything that we get introduced to later on, but the show really focuses on, like, the team, the Edgerunners, basically. Oh, there's other characters like the Doctor as well, but the show doesn't, like, try to focus on too many characters. It's very... It knows what it wants to do, and it's focused on that, and, you know, I couldn't ask for more at that point. So, getting into a kind of a little bit lighter themes here, the show is split into sort of 2 parts. The first part, again, is David being a newbie, being a rookie. He kind of sees a almost mentor in Maine, who's the leader of the Edgerunners. He seems to be like a nice guy despite how big and you know, mean he can be. Again, kind of doing parallels on Barrett from Final Fantasy VII here. It's through this we start to see David start to evolve, start to grow as a person, as well as introducing us to the world, the Edgerunners and everything. And one of the main themes of this first part is showing what happens when you have too much Chrome, right? Showing someone going psycho. And we see this in Maine. We see Maine basically going psycho. And I think this is really cool. This is something which happens in other media. Yeah, where we know there is like a downside to something, like something that you shouldn't do too often. And if you do, something bad's going to happen. And a lot of stories, as they should, show this. They show, look, these are the consequences if you go too far, right? And Cyberpunk shows this front and center. It shows you what is happening to Maine. And this is great because in the second half, when David has to step up and take over the Edgerunners, and he's basically, because he's got a high tolerance to like these enhancements and everything, and he's all chromed up, we know what's going to happen, right? We've seen firsthand what happens to someone when they go psycho. And David kind of thinks himself special. He thinks he can handle it. But I think we all know what is going to happen to the end, like towards the end. And I don't want to spoil too much more. There is like an inevitability, I think, in things in Cyberpunk. As well, bringing parallels to Final Fantasy VII, like how you don't mess with Shinra, right? Anybody that messes with Shinra ends up dead. I think it's very much the same with Arasaka. Anyone in Cyberpunk, anyone that messes with Arasaka is basically going to end up dead. And there is kind of like an inevitability to things in this show. That's how it ends. The ending is great. I really love the ending. It's very, again, I don't want to spoil it. I think the ending is great. I think the only real negative I have to say about the show is Lucy in the second half. In the second half, so in the first half, Lucy finds information that Arasaka has on David. And so in the second half, she's trying to protect him by doing stuff with this, you know, trying to sort of stop Arasaka from coming after David. And she's doing this alone. And I really... It's like one of those things where it's like, you know, someone's doing something to protect you and they're like, I can't talk about it, right? You just gotta trust me. I will protect you, you know, or like, just trust me, right? And it's like, just tell him. Just tell him what you're doing. That's the only negative I really have to say for this anime. I think it is absolutely fantastic. Go watch it if you can. The storytelling is really, really good, which I'm very thankful for, because Trigger can definitely have some ups and downs with its storytelling. Okay, so the writers also worked on, you know, Evangelion, Darling in the Franxx, obviously not all the episodes, just a couple of the episodes, FLCL, Gurren Lagann. So yeah, the writer seems to have worked on like a decent number of other like good shows. But yeah, and the story is all wrapped up very nicely, very neatly. It will leave an impact on you. It will have an emotional climax, and I think that is one of the best things you can do in stories if you want to leave, you know, an imprint on someone. That's my review. I really do want to talk more about these characters. I really want to analyze more about them and talk about, mainly David, Maine, and Lisa. But I do want to keep this video short. Those have been my thoughts for Cyberpunk. Please let me know what you thought in the comments below. It's been a fantastic show. Definitely recommend watching it. Please like and subscribe to the channel for more content. And thank you very much for watching. This has been Nat Rich, and I'll see you next one.